St. Margaret's Church was born into slavery, grew up in slavery, lived its first 172 years under slavery, until November 1st, 1864, when the Third Constitution of the state of Maryland eliminated legal slavery in the state. The Trail of Souls pilgrimage, launched in 2014 by the Episcopal Diocese of Maryland, marks the 150th year anniversary of the end of legal slavery in Maryland. The Trail of Souls pilgrimage is an actual and virtual pilgrimage intended to move towards truth and reconciliation regarding the effects of slavery on this state and the Church. During the years of legal slavery, during the years that followed, and during our time. St. Margaret's Church, Westminister Parish, Annapolis, is one of more than 20 diocesan churches and other sites participating in the Trail of Souls pilgrimage. St. Margaret's traces its history to June 9th, 1692. On that date, nearly 325 years ago, Sir Lionel Copley, Maryland's first colonial governor, signed the Act. The Act made the Church of England the official church of colonial Maryland and established 30 Anglican parishes in Maryland, including Broadneck Parish. By 1710, Broadneck Parish was Westminster Parish. St. Margaret's Church was appended later. The early boundaries of Broadneck Parish were described in the Act as south to the Severn River, east to the Chesapeake Bay, north to a line halfway between the Magathie and the Patapsco rivers, later changed to take in all of Anne Arundel County north to the Patapsco, and on the west, all the way to Anne Arundel County's western boundary. Still, the focus of Broadneck Parish was on the Broadneck Peninsula, the area in 1692 and today that is north of the Severn River, south of the Magathie River, and west of the Chesapeake Bay. In 1649, just 15 years after the establishment of St. Mary's City, the first English settlement in what became Maryland, a small company of Virginia Puritans, believed bringing enslaved persons with them, settled on the fertile land of the Broadneck Peninsula. 15 years later, in 1664, Maryland legalized slavery. Imported Africans were given the status slaves for life. A small group of Anglican settlers followed Puritans onto the Broadneck, and with Puritans who joined the Church of England after restoration of the English crown, became the small group of Broadneck Parish founding members. They reportedly worshipped in a community meeting house built by Puritans near Westminster town. By 1696, 4 years after the Act, few Puritans remained. Broadneck Parish occupied its first worship space in today's Cape St. Clair. Its slave labor was becoming vital to the economy of the area. At least 3 of Broadneck Parish's first 6 vestrymen were slaveholders. St. Margaret's has dedicated 5 handcraft historical markers to commemorate its 172-year history during the period of slavery in Maryland. St. Margaret's offers guided and directed pilgrimage visits for individuals and groups requesting to follow the Trail of Souls at St. Margaret's. Historical Marker 1 is located inside the church near the historic bell tower door and recalls baptisms, weddings, and funeral services held in the 1800s at St. Margaret's and other locations. Services conducted by St. Margaret's clergy for enslaved and free persons of African descent. No evidence exists for burials of any person of African descent in the present-day churchyard. on land the church has owned only since 1884. Historical marker number 2 is also located inside the church. It is immediately below historical marker 1 and recalls Sunday afternoon worship services for persons of African descent, free and enslaved, held at St. Margaret's in the mid-1800s. Apparently, this Sunday afternoon worship ended when the church burned in 1851. And though the church building was rebuilt by 1852, there is no record of persons of African descent worshiping at St. Margaret's after 1851. Historical marker number 3 is outside on the north side of the church. It tells us that at least 33 and perhaps as many as 100 enslaved persons worked Whitehall when St. Margaret's owned this 2,000-acre Maryland tidewater plantation from 1749 to 1764. Historical marker number 4 is also located outside and on the north side of the church. It acknowledges that enslaved persons likely served as unskilled laborers in the construction of 3 or 4 church buildings and a chapel of ease. These were erected at 4 different locations from 1695 through 1851. Historical marker number 5, located at the western edge of the churchyard, in front of a cemetery marker placed in 1972, and a plain stone placed in the 19th century, acknowledges that enslaved persons were typically buried outside white-only portions of graveyards and churchyards. Their simple markers soon disintegrated. In the process of researching and reporting this part of its nearly 325-year history, St. Margaret's recognizes that previous parish histories misrepresented and omitted records and stories of enslaved and other marginalized persons. Trail of Souls pilgrimage offers a unique opportunity to more accurately focus on this 172-year period of parish life at St. Margaret's, a parish that regrettably benefited from the atrocities of slavery. Preparations continue for the 325th anniversary of the parish in 2017. A more complete history can include stories of rectors who themselves held enslaved persons, speculation that the parish considered entering into the trade of enslaved persons as one means of achieving financial stability, post-Civil War fundraisers to aid Southern white families, silence in response to local and national civil rights efforts. Thus, in 1692, the Church of England became the official church of colonial Maryland, and the story began for 30 Maryland Anglican parishes, including what became St. Margaret's Episcopal Church. At the time, fewer than 1,000 persons of African descent were enslaved in Maryland. Likely, several hundred enslaved persons were held on the Broadneck Peninsula by the first members of St. Margaret's. Jump 100 years to 1790 and the first United States Census, Anne Arundel County alone had reached a population of nearly 23,000 persons. And of that number, more than 10,000 were enslaved persons of African descent. 45% of the county's population was made up of enslaved persons in 1790. On the Broadneck Peninsula, 80 white families maintained farms or plantations. 31 of these 80 families, including St. Margaret's families, held enslaved persons. Life for enslaved persons was brutal, particularly knowing that they would serve a lifetime in bondage. Enslaved persons lived with minimal amounts of food, clothing, rest, and shelter. Masters might be considered good persons simply if enslaved persons could congregate after work, attend church services on Sunday, enjoy the same holidays whites celebrated, hunt, and fish. Not be afraid of being sold to a dealer. At the start of the 1800s, slavery's hold on the Broadneck Peninsula was lessening, due more to economic conditions than any moral uprising against slavery. White landowning families grew larger. Whites raised and sold farm crops, including wheat, corn, vegetables, fruits, relying less and less on tobacco and the number of enslaved persons required to raise tobacco. In Maryland, by 1860, at least 50,000 formerly enslaved persons had received freedom, making Maryland the state with the largest population of free blacks among all states at the start of the Civil War. Then, on November 1st, 1864, after 200 years, legalized slavery ended in Maryland. Significant changes would come to the Broadneck Peninsula. Changes to St. Margaret's would come, with 8 acres of additional land in 1884, a new church by 1895, and new generations of church-going members, albeit coming from the families who had lived with slavery as normal on the Broadneck Peninsula, coming from families that had once been slaveholders. At its core, St. Margaret's would experience little change during the next 100 years. This is a story for another time.